What are you conscious of right now? The Buddhist understanding of consciousness. There's a question hiding inside your everyday experience, and it's so close to you that you've probably never noticed it. When you say, "I'm aware of the sound," or "I'm conscious of my breathing," what's actually happening? We use these words so casually. But have you ever looked at awareness itself? Not what it shows you, but the thing doing the knowing. Most of us haven't. Awareness is like the air in the room, so constant that it never occurs to us to examine it. We spend our entire lives inside it, and yet we've never once turned around and asked, "What are you really?" Here's why that matters. There are two layers to what we call being conscious, and almost nobody notices they're completely different things. The first layer is raw experience. Your eyes receiving light, your ears picking up vibration, your skin sensing warmth. That's happening right now, whether you pay attention or not. But there's a second layer. This is the moment your mind turns around and says, "I am seeing, I am hearing, I am feeling." That's not the experience itself. That's a thought about the experience, a commentary, and it arrives just after the fact, always just after. We confuse these two layers so completely that we believe they're the same thing. When you say, "I'm conscious of the sound," you think you're describing one seamless event. But two very different things happened. First, hearing occurred. Then, a fraction of a moment later, your mind produced a thought. "I am hearing." And that thought, that second layer, is what you actually mean when you say consciousness. The raw hearing was already done by then. Everything you believe about yourself, your identity, your continuity, your sense of being someone who exists through time, is built on top of that second layer. It all depends on the assumption that "I am aware" is a direct observation of reality, rather than a story being told just slightly after the fact. And if that assumption is worth questioning, then a great deal of what you believe about your suffering may be worth questioning too. Try something right now. It will only take a moment. Listen to whatever sound is around you. Traffic, wind, the hum of a machine, silence itself. Just hear it. Don't name it. Don't analyze it. Let the sound come to you, rather than reaching out toward it. Now, try to catch the exact moment hearing begins. Not the moment you realize, "Oh, I'm hearing something." That's too late. I mean the actual instant when sound first meets awareness. If you're like most people, you'll notice something strange. You can't quite find it. By the time you know you're hearing, the hearing has already happened. There's a sense of always arriving just after the event, like walking into a room where someone was just standing a moment ago. You can feel the warmth they left behind, but they're already gone. You missed them by a breath. William James noticed this over 100 years ago. He compared it to trying to turn on a light fast enough to see what darkness looks like. The moment you look, the thing you're looking for has already changed. And what replaces it is always something new, a thought about what just happened, a reflection, a tiny narrative, never the raw event itself. This leads somewhere important. If every time you try to observe awareness, what you actually find is a thought about awareness, then what you call "I am conscious right now" isn't really happening right now. It's a report. A memory so fresh it feels like the present moment, but it's already the past by the time you experience it. Your mind takes raw experience, stamps it with "I" and "now," and hands it to you as if it just happened. But it happened a moment ago, and your mind is playing it back so smoothly you can't see the edit. Neuroscience has measured this gap. Benjamin Libet's experiments showed that the brain begins preparing for an action before the person consciously decides to act. The brain moves first. You hear about it later. And then, without realizing it, you experience the whole sequence, as if you were in charge all along. What this means is something quite profound, if you let it in. The present moment, as you experience it, is always a construction. It's always already a memory by the time it reaches you. And the you it reaches is itself part of the construction. You've never actually met your own awareness face to face. You've only ever met the portrait that memory paints of it. And you've mistaken the portrait for the person. Which raises a deeper question. If all you've ever known of consciousness is the mind's report about consciousness, then what is consciousness itself? Is it even a thing? Or have we been thinking about it wrong from the very beginning? The Buddha asked exactly this question, and his answer was precise enough to unsettle everything we think we know about what it means to be aware. In the 𝐿 Sutta, there's a monk named Sati who makes a claim that sounds perfectly reasonable. He says that as far as he understands the Buddha's teaching, it is just this consciousness that runs and wanders on from life to life. One continuous stream, one unbroken line of awareness, flowing through every experience. Most of us believe something very similar. Maybe not in terms of past lives, but we do believe there's a continuous something inside. A stream of consciousness that was there when we woke up this morning, that's been here all day, and that will be here tomorrow. The same awareness, just pointed at different things. And it feels so obvious that it hardly seems worth questioning. What happened next in the sutta is worth telling carefully, because it's easy to misread. The other monks had already tried to help Sati see the difficulty with his view, but Sati held firm, not out of arrogance, but out of genuine conviction. He truly believed he was understanding the teaching correctly. So the matter came before the Buddha. The Buddha asked him a quiet but precise question. Which consciousness, Sati, is that? And Sati answered with full sincerity. This speaker, this knower, that is sensitive here and there to the ripening of good and evil actions. In other words, this thing inside me that knows, that experiences, that continues. He was describing exactly what most of us feel when we look inward. The Buddha's response was direct. He reminded Sati that in many ways he had taught that apart from a requisite condition, there is no coming into play of consciousness. The sutta describes Sati's view as pernicious, and that's a strong word. But if you read the context, the concern is not with Sati as a person. The Buddha could see that this particular misunderstanding, if left uncorrected, would quietly become an obstacle for anyone who adopted it. It would close a door that needed to stay open. The correction was an act of care, not just for Sati, but for everyone listening. Then the Buddha turned to the other monks and explained what he meant. Consciousness, he said, is classified simply by the requisite condition in dependence on which it arises. When the eye meets a visible form, eye consciousness arises. When the ear meets sounds, ear consciousness arises. When the mind meets ideas, mind consciousness arises. And he offered an image that I find extraordinarily precise. Just as fire is classified by whatever it burns, a wood fire, a grass fire, a cow dung fire, a chaff fire, consciousness is classified by the condition through which it arises. There is no fire in general floating around, waiting for something to burn. And there is no consciousness in general floating around inside you, waiting for something to know. Take away the fuel, and there's no fire. Take away the conditions, and there's no consciousness. It was never a substance, never a container holding your experiences like a jar holds water. It's an event, something that happens when certain conditions come together and stops happening when they fall apart. The way a clap stops existing the moment your hands separate. You wouldn't ask, where did the clap go? It didn't go anywhere. It was never a thing that could go anywhere. It just stopped happening. So that feeling of continuous awareness flowing through your day, what is it? According to the Buddha's analysis, it's millions of momentary knowing events, arising and vanishing, one after another, so fast they blur together. Like spinning a lit match in the dark and seeing a circle of fire. The circle doesn't exist. There's only a single point of light, moving. And between each flash, a gap where nobody is home. But the mind doesn't rest easily with gaps. It's in the nature of the mind to seek continuity, to weave a story, to make sense of things. So it fills them in, stitches the flashes together into a smooth narrative, and places a character at the center. Me, the one who's been aware this whole time. And that character feels absolutely real. But it's a product of the process. One more event arising within the stream, mistaking itself for the riverbank. Now, many people hear this and say, fine, maybe the everyday self is constructed, but surely there's a deeper awareness underneath, a pure consciousness, a witness that watches everything come and go. It's a natural response. But the Buddha's teaching in this same sutta is very clear about dependently co-arisen consciousness. Apart from a requisite condition, there is no coming into play of consciousness. If you experience something in deep meditation that feels like pure objectless awareness, what may actually be happening is that the object has become so subtle, you don't recognize it anymore. Like sitting in a room so quiet, you think there's no sound at all. But there is. The blood in your ears, the hum of your nervous system. Absolute silence doesn't exist for a living body, and objectless awareness may not exist for a functioning mind. I know this might be hard to sit with. The idea of a pure, unchanging awareness gives you something solid, something that feels like home. But the Buddha would gently ask, why do you need something solid? And if you look carefully, you might find that the desire for an unchanging foundation is itself a very subtle form of craving. Perhaps the most sophisticated form of it. Craving for certainty. For a place where the searching can finally stop. So if consciousness isn't a thing, if it's events arising and vanishing with conditions, then what holds everything up? Does the physical world produce consciousness? Or does consciousness produce the physical world? In the Nalakalapa Sutta, the Venerable Mahakotthita asks the Venerable Sariputta, the monk widely regarded as the foremost in wisdom among the Buddha's followers, a series of questions. Is name and form self-made? Other-made? Both? Or does it arise spontaneously? Sariputta answers that none of these apply. Name and form arises with consciousness as its requisite condition. But then, when Mahakotthita asks the same question about consciousness, Sariputta gives an answer that mirrors the first. Consciousness arises with name and form as its requisite condition. Mahakotthita pauses. He's heard that name and form depends on consciousness, and also that consciousness depends on name and form. How can both be true? If each one depends on the other, which one comes first? Which one is the ground? Sariputta offers one of the most elegant analogies in the canon. It is as if two sheaves of reeds were to stand leaning against one another. Pull one away, the other falls. They stand only because of each other, and they collapse together. There's something very tender about this image, if you sit with it. Two things, neither of which can stand alone, holding each other up. No hierarchy, no foundation, no master, and no servant. Just mutual support and mutual vulnerability. That's the picture of reality the Buddha offers. This is paticca-samuppada, dependent origination. Everything arises in relationship. Everything depends on conditions. The physical world doesn't produce consciousness the way a factory produces goods. Consciousness doesn't dream up the physical world. They co-arise. They lean on each other. Remove one, the other has no basis. We are wired to look for bedrock, the fundamental particle, the first principle, the ultimate reality. Every tradition has its own candidate. Matter, mind, God, Brahman, pure awareness. And from the Buddha's perspective, it's worth asking whether the search itself might be part of the difficulty. The craving for solid ground in a reality that may have no solid ground. That's one of the deepest, most understandable expressions of tanha. It disguises itself as wisdom, as the highest aspiration. But underneath it, if you look honestly, there's often just a very old, very human ache. The fear that without ground, everything falls apart. That without something permanent to stand on, life has no meaning. And that fear deserves compassion. It's a very natural thing to want ground beneath your feet. We've all felt it, the need for something that won't shift. But the Buddha's teaching offers a different way of seeing. Things have always been in motion, always arising and passing away. And that has always been okay. Fire is real while it burns. A wave is real while it crests. Your experience right now is real, vivid, and genuine. It just doesn't need to rest on anything permanent. It needs conditions. And conditions are here, right now, as they always have been. When you begin to see this in your own experience, something in you relaxes. The exhausting search for something solid, something that will finally make you feel safe. That search can quietly come to rest. And in that resting, there's a kind of peace that no ground could ever have given you. Because the peace doesn't come from finding ground. It comes from no longer needing it. Let me bring all of this closer to where we actually live. Because at the end of the day, what matters is whether any of this touches your real experience. Think about where most of your deepest suffering comes from. The ache that sits in your chest at 3 a.m. The feeling that you're not enough. The way a single sentence from someone you love can ruin your entire week. None of that is entirely about what happened. There's something deeper running underneath. There's a silent belief, so constant, so familiar, that most of us have never noticed it's there, that says, there is a me at the center of this, and that me can be damaged. This belief is so quiet, so foundational, that it doesn't feel like a belief at all. It feels like reality. Someone criticizes you, and the deeper ache is the feeling that I have been made smaller. You lose something you love, and woven into the grief is a sense that something has been taken from me. You lie awake with anxiety, and if you look closely, it's not really about what might happen tomorrow. It's about whether I can survive it. And this me, this fixed observer at the center of every experience, is exactly what we've been gently examining throughout this conversation. It's the second layer we talked about at the beginning. The commentary, arriving just after the fact. The character the mind places at the center of the story it tells itself. something that feels as solid and familiar as gravity, but turns out, when you look with patience, to be something more fluid, more constructed than you assumed. Modern psychology calls what happens when this identification softens diffusion or decentering, learning to see thoughts as passing mental events rather than facts about who you are. These are genuinely helpful frameworks. But the Buddha's insight goes somewhere these frameworks don't quite reach. Diffusion and decentering still assume there's someone doing the diffusing, someone stepping back to observe. What the Buddha noticed is something quieter than that. When you look carefully enough, there's no one stepping back. There's just the stepping back happening, seeing happening, hearing happening, understanding happening. The whole system running, moment by moment, with extraordinary sensitivity, and no operator. And this is where the healing actually lives. Not in the understanding, but in the seeing. In the moment when you sit quietly and look for the one who is aware, and genuinely, honestly, do not find anyone there. You look for the center, and the center isn't where you left it. And yet everything is still here. Hearing continues. Seeing continues. The breath moves. Life goes on, fully alive, fully present. Nothing is missing. Nothing needs to be added. What happened is that a weight got put down. The weight of being someone. The weight of constantly holding together a self that was never the solid thing you imagined. If you've been carrying that weight for 20 years, or 40, or your whole life, then even a moment of setting it down can feel like stepping out of a building you didn't know you were inside. And what you find on the other side is not emptiness, and it's not detachment. If anything, you become more present than you've ever been, because the background noise of self-concern has gone quiet, and for the first time, you can actually hear the world as it is. A sound is just a sound. A person in front of you is just a person. Alive, mysterious, as groundless as you are. And there's an odd tenderness in seeing that. A kindness that doesn't need a reason. A willingness to be here, without needing to know why. So here we are, back where we started. What are you conscious of right now? This time, don't answer. Just look at the looking. Feel the feeling of being aware. And then, gently, see if you can find the one who is aware. See if there's a center. See if there's someone in the room. Take your time with this. There's no rush. And if all you find is an open, weightless process, knowing happening, hearing happening, life unfolding with no owner and no center, then you haven't learned something new. You've simply noticed what was always the case. The weight was never yours. Life is staggeringly, beautifully real. It always was. It's just that the one who was supposedly carrying all of it was never the fixed, solid thing you imagined.